Sarah had always believed that love came with grand gestures, flowers delivered to her office, surprise weekend getaways, passionate declarations under starlit skies. At 32, she had experienced enough relationships to know what romance was supposed to look like. Or so she thought. The coffee shop on Fifth Street had become her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in her laptop screen and pretend the world outside didn't exist. It was there, on a Tuesday morning that felt like every other Tuesday morning, that she first noticed him. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. Medium height, brown hair that always looked slightly disheveled, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets behind wire-rimmed glasses. He ordered the same thing every day, a black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and always sat at the corner table by the window. But there was something about the way he did everything that caught her attention. The way he thanked the barista with genuine warmth, not the hurried politeness most people offered. The way he held doors open for strangers, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because it seemed as natural to him as breathing. The way he smiled at children who ran past his table, and how he always left his table cleaner than he found it. Sarah found herself arriving at the coffee shop earlier each day, just to watch him. She told herself it was research for her novel. She was a freelance writer, after all, and people watching was part of her job. But deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. His name was David. She learned from overhearing the barista call out his order. David, who read actual books instead of scrolling through his phone. David, who once spent 10 minutes helping an elderly woman figure out how to connect to the Wi-Fi. David, who never seemed to notice that Sarah was watching him. 3 weeks passed before their first real interaction. Sarah had been struggling with a particularly difficult chapter, staring at her blank screen with growing frustration, when she felt a gentle presence beside her table. "Excuse me," David said, his voice softer than she had imagined. "I don't mean to interrupt, but you've been sitting here for 2 hours without touching your coffee. Are you okay?" Sarah looked up into his concerned eyes and felt something shift inside her chest. "I'm fine," she said quickly, then added more honestly. "Actually, I'm stuck. I'm a writer, and sometimes the words just won't come." David's face lit up with understanding. "I know that feeling. I'm a librarian and I help people find the right words every day. Sometimes the hardest part is just getting started." "A librarian," Sarah repeated, and somehow that made perfect sense. Of course he was a librarian. Of course he helped people find things they were looking for. "Would you mind if I asked what you're writing about?" David asked, and Sarah found herself saying yes before she could think better of it. What followed was the most natural conversation Sarah had experienced in years. David listened, truly listened, as she explained her novel about a woman searching for meaning in the small moments of life. He asked thoughtful questions and offered gentle insights without trying to fix her problems or take over her story. "You know," David said after she finished explaining her writer's block, "maybe the problem isn't that you don't know what to write. Maybe it's that you're afraid to write what you really want to say." The words hit Sarah like a revelation. She stared at him, this quiet man who had somehow seen straight through to the heart of her struggle. "I should let you get back to your work," David said, standing up. "But if you ever want to talk about writing again, I'm here most mornings." After he left, Sarah sat staring at her laptop screen for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, she began to type. The words flowed like water, and for the first time in months, she forgot about everything except the story she was telling. The next morning, she arrived at the coffee shop with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. David was already there, reading a worn copy of the book Thief, and when he saw her, he smiled. "How did the writing go?" he asked. Better than it has in months, Sarah admitted. Thank you for that. I didn't do anything, David said. You just needed someone to listen. But Sarah knew it was more than that. There was something about David's presence that made her feel safe to be vulnerable, to admit her struggles without fear of judgment. In a world that often felt harsh and hurried, he was a pocket of gentleness. They began talking every morning. Not planned conversations, but natural ones that grew from shared smiles and comfortable silences. Sarah learned that David had been a librarian for 8 years, that he had a cat named Fitzgerald, and that he believed books could change the world one reader at a time. David learned that Sarah had been writing since she was 12, that she preferred rain to sunshine, and that she had a habit of collecting interesting coffee cups from thrift stores. That it was the things they didn't say that spoke the loudest. The way David's eyes lingered on Sarah's face when she laughed. The way Sarah found herself dressing a little more carefully on mornings when she knew she'd see him. The way they both seemed to arrive at the coffee shop earlier and earlier, as if they were racing towards something they couldn't quite name. One morning, Sarah arrived to find David's usual table empty. She waited an hour, then 2. But he never came. The next day was the same. By the 3rd day, Sarah was fighting a panic she couldn't explain. She barely knew this man, she told herself. There was no reason to feel this lost without him. But the feeling persisted. The coffee shop felt hollow without his quiet presence. Even her writing suffered, as if David's absence had stolen away the words he had helped her find. On the 4th day, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She walked to the library. The building was everything she had imagined: tall windows, comfortable reading chairs, and the kind of peaceful quiet that invited deep thoughts. She found David at the reference desk, helping a young student with a research project. When he looked up and saw her, his face transformed with surprise and something that might have been joy. Sarah, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice than it ever had before. What are you doing here? Looking for a book, she said, which was true, though not the whole truth, and wondering why you haven't been at the coffee shop. David's expression grew sheepish. I've been working extra shifts. Budget cuts, you know. But I've missed our conversations. Me too, Sarah admitted, and the honesty of it hung between them like a bridge. David finished helping the student, then turned back to Sarah. What kind of book are you looking for? Something about taking chances, Sarah said, meeting his eyes. Something about what happens when you stop being afraid of your own feelings. David studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah felt as if he were reading her like one of his beloved books. I think I know exactly what you need, he said. He led her through the stacks to a section she had never explored before. His fingers traced along the spines of books until he found what he was looking for. A slim volume of poetry by a writer Sarah had never heard of. This isn't what I expected, Sarah said, opening to a random page. The best things usually aren't. David replied, but sometimes the thing we need most is the thing we never knew we were looking for. Sarah read a few lines of poetry, words about love found in ordinary moments, about the courage required to open your heart to someone who might not love you back. When she looked up, David was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Are we still just talking about books? David's smile was slow and uncertain and beautiful. I don't think we've been talking about books for weeks. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and fear. Sarah felt her heart racing, but for the first time in her adult life, she didn't want to run from the feeling. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I don't know how to be with someone who makes me feel like this. Like what? David asked, stepping closer. Like I'm home, Sarah whispered. Like I've been waiting my whole life for morning conversations and quiet moments and someone who sees me exactly as I am. David reached out and touched her hand, the first time they had ever made physical contact. His skin was warm and slightly rough, the hands of someone who handled books all day and wasn't afraid of honest work. I don't know how to do this either, he said. I've never felt this way about anyone before, but I think maybe not knowing is okay, as long as we figure it out together. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been searching for. Without knowing it, not grand gestures or dramatic decorations, but something deeper and more real. A kindness that ran to his core, a gentleness that made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, a love that grew from truly seeing and being seen. I'd like that, she said. I'd like to figure it out together. David's smile was radiant. Then let's start with dinner. Somewhere quiet where we can talk. I know just the place, Sarah said. There's this little Italian restaurant that's been calling my name for months. As they walked out of the library together, Sarah felt as if she was stepping into a new chapter of her life. The sun seemed brighter, the air sweeter, and for the first time in years, she felt completely present in the moment. Dinner was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. They talked about books and dreams and the small moments that made life beautiful. David told her about his childhood in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and how he had always felt like he was searching for something he couldn't name, until he moved to the city. Sarah shared her fears about her writing, about whether she was good enough, whether her words mattered. David listened with the same quiet attention he gave to library patrons, but there was something more in his eyes now, a tenderness that made Sarah's breath catch. Your words matter, he said when she finished talking. I've only known you for a few weeks, but I can see how much you care about getting it right, about telling stories that mean something. That's what makes a writer, not whether you're published or famous. How do you always know exactly what to say? Sarah asked. I don't, David admitted. I just try to say what I really think, what I really feel. Life's too short for anything else. After dinner, they walked slowly back to Sarah's apartment, neither of them ready for the evening to end. The city was alive around them, but Sarah felt cocooned in a bubble of possibility. I have to tell you something, David said as they reached her building. I've been thinking about you every morning for weeks. Even before we started talking, I looked forward to seeing you in the coffee shop. You have this way of concentrating that's beautiful to watch, and when you smile, it's like watching the sun come out. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I've been watching you too, she admitted. The way you treat people, the way you move through the world like you're part of something bigger than yourself. I've never known anyone like you. They stood facing each other on the sidewalk, and Sarah felt as if they were balanced on the edge of something momentous. The air between them hummed with possibility. Can I kiss you? David asked, and the old-fashioned courtesy of asking permission made Sarah's heart flutter. Yes, she whispered. David's kiss was gentle and sure, like everything else about him. It tasted like coffee and possibility and the promise of slow Sunday mornings. When they broke apart, Sarah felt dizzy with joy. I should go, David said, though he made no move to leave. You should, Sarah agreed, though she didn't want him to. I'll see you tomorrow morning, he asked. You'll see me tomorrow morning, Sarah confirmed as she watched him walk away. Sarah felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. She had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just love, but the right kind of love. The kind that grew from friendship and respect and truly seeing each other. The next few weeks passed in a blur of perfect moments. Morning conversations at the coffee shop became afternoon walks through the park. Evening phone calls stretched late into the night, covering everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Sarah's writing flourished under David's gentle encouragement. She finished her novel and began submitting it to publishers. David helped her research agents and offered to read her query letters, though Sarah found herself more interested in watching his face as he read than in his feedback. "You're going to be published," David said one evening as they sat on Sarah's couch, her laptop balanced between them. "I can feel it." "How can you be so sure?" Sarah asked. "Because you write with your whole heart," David said simply. "And people need stories written with that kind of honesty." Sarah kissed him then, unable to contain the love that seemed to grow stronger every day. Being with David felt like coming home to a place she had never been before. They made love for the first time on a rainy Thursday evening, 3 months after their first conversation. It was gentle and tender and perfect, like everything else about their relationship. Afterward, they lay entwined in Sarah's bed, listening to the rain against the windows. "I love you," David whispered into the darkness, and Sarah felt as if her heart might explode with joy. "I love you too," she whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Spring became summer, and their love deepened like roots finding rich soil. They developed rituals and inside jokes and the kind of comfortable intimacy that made Sarah believe in forever. David met her parents and charmed them completely. Sarah spent weekends at David's apartment, learning to love his cat and his collection of first edition poetry books. But it was the small moments that Sarah treasured most. The way David brought her coffee in bed on weekend mornings. The way he listened to her read new chapters aloud, his face reflecting every emotion in her words. The way he held her hand while they walked, as if he were afraid she might disappear. "I never thought I could be this happy," Sarah told him one evening as they sat on his fire escape, watching the sunset paint the city gold. "Neither did I," David admitted. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people who were braver or luckier or more deserving." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now I think maybe we make our own happiness," David said. "Maybe it's not about grand gestures or perfect moments. Maybe it's about finding someone who makes the ordinary moments feel extraordinary." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "I love your ordinary moments," she said. "I love yours too," David replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head as autumn approached. Sarah's book was accepted for publication. The call came on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop, and she practically flew across the room to share the news with David. "They want to publish it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They really want to publish it." David stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around right there in the middle of the coffee shop. Other patrons looked up from their newspapers and laptops, smiling at the obvious joy radiating from the couple. "I'm so proud of you," David said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "You did it. You really did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "I couldn't have finished it without you." "You could have," David said seriously. "You just needed someone to believe in you as much as you believed in your story." That night, they celebrated with champagne and take-out Chinese food, eating off paper plates on Sarah's living room floor. It was perfect in its imperfection, exactly the kind of celebration that felt true to who they were as a couple. "I have something for you," David said as they finished eating. He pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. Sarah opened it to find a beautiful leather journal, her initials embossed in gold on the cover. "For your next book," David said, "and all the ones after that." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said. "But you didn't need to, I wanted." David interrupted. "I want to be part of your writing journey, whatever comes next." Sarah kissed him then, tasting champagne and possibility and the promise of shared tomorrows. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you too, David replied, and Sarah felt as if she were floating. Winter arrived with the first snow, and Sarah's book entered the final stages of editing. She and David had settled into a rhythm of love that felt as natural as breathing. They talked about moving in together, about the future, about all the books Sarah would write, and all the stories David would help people find. It was on a December evening, as they walked through the city transformed by snow, that everything changed. They had been talking about Christmas plans, about whether to visit Sarah's parents or David's, when Sarah noticed the way David had grown quiet. His hand in hers felt tense, and she could see something working behind his eyes. Are you okay? She asked as they paused at a red light. I'm fine, David said, but his voice carried a weight that made Sarah's stomach flutter with unease. You're not fine, Sarah said gently. You've been distant all week. What's going on? David looked at her then, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her heart race with fear. Can we sit down somewhere? I need to tell you something. They found a coffee shop, not their coffee shop, but a different one, bright and impersonal and wrong for the conversation that was about to happen. David ordered tea for both of them, though neither of them drank it. I got a job offer, David said. Finally, the words falling between them like stones. Sarah felt her world tilt. That's wonderful, she said automatically, though something in his tone told her it wasn't wonderful at all. It's in Portland, David continued. Head librarian at the main branch. It's everything I've ever wanted, professionally speaking. Portland, Sarah repeated, her mind struggling to process what this meant. I know it's far, David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I know it complicates everything. But Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime. Sarah stared at their joined hands, trying to make sense of the emotions crashing through her. When would you leave? She asked. January 15th, David said quietly. I know it's soon, but 2 weeks, Sarah interrupted. You'd leave in 2 weeks. I haven't accepted yet, David said quickly. I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted to figure out what this means for us. Sarah felt as if she were drowning. What do you want it to mean? David was quiet for a long moment. I want you to come with me, he said finally. I want us to start over together in a new city. I want to build a life with you, Sarah. A real life. The words should have filled Sarah with joy, but instead she felt only panic. I can't just leave, she said. My book is being published here. My editor is here. My whole life is here. Your life could be anywhere, David said. You're a writer. You can write anywhere. It's not that simple, Sarah protested. I have responsibilities, commitments. I can't just drop everything and follow you across the country. I'm not asking you to follow me, David said. I'm asking you to come with me. There's a difference. Sarah pulled her hand away from his, suddenly feeling suffocated. Is there? Because it feels like you've made this decision without me, and now you're expecting me to rearrange my entire life to accommodate it. That's not what I'm doing, David said, his voice strained. I'm trying to include you in one of the biggest decisions of my life, by presenting it as a fait accompli. Sarah shot back. You've already decided to take the job, haven't you? You're just looking for my permission to feel good about it. David's face went pale. That's not fair, isn't it? Sarah asked, tears starting to blur her vision. You've been pulling away from me all week. And now I know why. You've been planning your exit strategy. Sarah, please, David said, reaching for her hand again. Don't make this about me leaving you. This is about us building something together. No, Sarah said, standing up abruptly. This is about you choosing your career over us. And that's fine, David. I understand. But don't pretend it's something. It's not. She left the coffee shop before David could respond, walking blindly through the snowy streets until she found herself at her apartment. She climbed the stairs to her unit and collapsed on her couch, finally allowing herself to cry. There. Tears came in waves, washing over her with a force that surprised her. She had known heartbreak before, but this felt different. This felt like losing a piece of herself. Her phone buzzed with texts from David, apologies, explanations, pleas for her to call him back. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to respond. She felt betrayed and abandoned, and no amount of explanation could change that. 3 days passed before she saw David again. He was waiting outside her building when she came home from the grocery store, looking haggard and desperate. Please, he said when he saw her. Just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain. Sarah wanted to walk past him, to maintain her anger and her distance. But something in his eyes stopped her. 5 minutes, she said. They sat on the steps of her building, the concrete cold beneath them. David looked as if he hadn't slept in days. I handled this badly, he said. I should have told you about the job offer the moment I got it. I should have included you in the decision from the beginning. Why didn't you? Sarah asked. David was quiet for a long moment. Because I was afraid, he said finally. I was afraid. You'd asked me not to take it, and I was afraid I'd say yes. And then I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what if. The honesty of his answer cut through Sarah's anger like a knife. So you decided to make the choice for both of us? I didn't decide anything, David said. I'm still deciding. But Sarah, I need you to understand how big this is for me. I've been working towards something like this my entire career. And I need you to understand how big this is for me too, Sarah replied. Not just leaving the city, but the way you've handled it. The way you've made me feel like an afterthought in your life. You're not an afterthought, David said fiercely. You're the most important thing in my life. That's why I want you to come with me. Sarah looked at him. This man she loved more than she had ever loved anyone, and felt her heart breaking all over again. I don't know if I can trust you anymore, she said quietly. The words hung between them like a chasm. David's face crumpled, and Sarah saw that her response had hurt him as much as his job offer had hurt her. What can I do? David asked. How can I fix this? Sarah shook her head. I don't know if you can. They sat in silence for a long time, watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. Finally, David stood up. I love you, he said. I know I've made a mess of this, but I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. If you can find a way to forgive me, if you can find a way to trust me again, I'll wait for you to decide about. Portland. No pressure, no timeline. Just think about it. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her tears. The next week passed in a blur of confusion and pain. Sarah threw herself into her work, editing her book with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She avoided the coffee shop, avoided anywhere she might run into David, and tried to ignore the texts he sent, not pushing or pleading, just letting her know he was thinking of her. Friends offered advice. But Sarah found herself unable to explain the depth of her conflict. On paper, David's request was reasonable. People relocated for career opportunities all the time. Couples made sacrifices for each other. But something about the way he had handled it made Sarah feel small and disposable. It was her editor, Margaret, who finally cut through the fog of Sarah's emotions. You're in love with him, Margaret said over lunch, after Sarah had spent an hour complaining about David's selfishness. That's not the point, Sarah protested. It's exactly the point, Margaret replied. You're not angry because he wants to move to Portland. You're angry because he made you feel like he could leave you behind. Because he could, Sarah said. He was planning to take that job whether I came or not. Was he? Margaret asked. Or was he trying to figure out how to include you in his dream? Sarah stared at her editor, feeling something shift in her chest. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe you should find out, Margaret suggested. Before you lose something you'll regret losing for the rest of your life. That night, Sarah called David. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for her call. Hi, she said, her voice small. Hi, David replied, and she could hear the hope in his voice. Can we talk? In person? Of course. Where? The coffee shop, Sarah said. Our coffee shop. When Sarah arrived, David was already there, sitting at his usual table by the window. He looked up when she entered, and his face was so full of love and hope and fear that Sarah felt her heart clench. Sat down across from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Finally, Sarah spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, about building a life together. And I realized something. I've been so focused on what I'd be giving up that I haven't thought about what I might be gaining. David's eyes brightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I've also been thinking about trust, Sarah went on. About how you made me feel like you were planning to leave me behind. And I need to know honestly, if you would have taken that job even if I said no to coming with you. David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah appreciated that he was considering his answer carefully. I don't know, he said finally. A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation. But now? Now I don't think I could be happy in Portland without you. I don't think I could be happy anywhere without you. But you still want the job, Sarah sighed. I do, David admitted. It's everything I've worked for. But Sarah, I want you more. If you asked me to stay, I'd stay. If you asked me to turn down the job, I'd turn it down. And I'd try not to resent you for it. But I can't promise I'd succeed. The brutal honesty of his answer was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. And if I came with you to Portland, then we'd figure it out together, David said. We'd find you an editor, we'd build a network, we'd make it work. Because that's what people do when they love each other. They figure it out together. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, David said. I'm terrified that I'm asking too much of you. I'm terrified that even if you say yes, you'll end up hating me for taking you away from everything you know. And I'm terrified that if I say no, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been, Sarah said. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their fears and hopes hanging between them. What if we tried? Sarah said finally. What if we went to Portland together, and if it doesn't work out, we figure out something else? David's face lit up like sunrise. Do you mean that? I mean it, Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I love you, David. I love you more than I love being safe, more than I love my comfort zone. I want to see what we can build together. David reached across the table and took her hands, his eyes bright with tears. I love you too, he said. And I promise, if you come with me, I'll spend every day making sure you don't regret it. Sarah smiled through her tears. I'll hold you to that. They talked until the coffee shop closed, planning their move and their future with the kind of excitement that made Sarah feel 22 again. When they finally left, David walked her home, their hands clasped tightly together. I have one condition, Sarah said as they reached her building. Anything, David replied. In Portland, we find a new coffee shop. Our coffee shop. Somewhere we can start fresh. David smiled and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. I think I can manage that. As Sarah watched him walk away, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real, bright, unqualified hope for the future they were about to build together. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah gave notice on her apartment, arranged to work remotely with her editor, and began the process of relocating her life. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly the kind of adventure she had always wanted, but never been brave enough to take. David threw himself into helping her, making lists and researching neighborhoods and generally being the steady, supportive presence she needed. Watching him care for her practical concerns with the same attention he gave to her emotional ones reminded Sarah why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. 3 days before their departure, they had their last morning at the coffee shop on 5th Street. It felt surreal, sitting in the place where their love story had begun, knowing they were about to close that chapter and begin a new one. Are you ready? David asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. Sarah looked around the coffee shop, memorizing the details, the chipped paint on the window frame, the way the morning light fell across their table, the sound of the espresso machine in the background. Then she looked at David, this man who had changed her life simply by being exactly who he was. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. On their last night in the city, they walked through the streets they had explored, together, revisiting the places that had become part of their story. The library where Sarah had first realized she loved him, the Italian restaurant where they had their first real date, the park where they had spent countless afternoons talking about everything and nothing. I'm going to miss this, Sarah said, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. We'll make new memories, David said. Better ones. How can you be so sure? Sarah asked. David turned to her, his eyes serious in the lamplight. Because we'll be making them together. And because I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know how grateful I am that you chose to come with me. Sarah felt her heart swell with love. I didn't choose to come with you, she said. I chose to come with us. I chose to see what we could build together. David smiled and kissed her, and Sarah tasted promise and possibility and the beginning of their next chapter. The flight to Portland was smooth and uneventful, but Sarah felt as if she were flying toward her future in more ways than one. David held her hand during takeoff, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, and Sarah felt anchored even as they rose above the clouds. Their new apartment was small but full of light, with big windows that looked out over the city that would become their home. As they unpacked their boxes, mixing their belongings together, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that surprised her. No regrets? David asked as they collapsed on their new couch, surrounded by empty boxes and the detritus of their old lives. No. Regrets, Sarah said, curling up against his side. Only possibilities. On their first morning in Portland, they walked through the unfamiliar streets, until they found a coffee shop that felt right small and cozy, with the kind of atmosphere that invited lingering. David ordered his usual black coffee and blueberry muffin, while Sarah tried something new, a lavender latte that tasted like adventure. So, David said as they settled at a table by the window, what happens now? Sarah smiled, pulling out the leather journal he had given her months ago. Now we write the next chapter, she said. As she opened the journal to its first blank page, Sarah felt the familiar flutter of excitement that came with new beginnings. The page was empty, full of potential, waiting for her to fill it with the story of their life together. She looked up at David, this man who had loved her enough to include her in his dreams, who had been patient enough to wait for her to find her courage, who had been honest enough to show her his fears as well as his hopes. I love you, she said, and the words felt as fresh and true as they had the first time she had said them. I love you too, David replied, and Sarah knew that whatever they wrote on the blank pages ahead, they would write it together. Outside the coffee shop window, their new city stretched before them, full of unexplored streets and unmade memories. Sarah picked up her pen and began to write, the words flowing as naturally as breath, as naturally as love. The story continues ... but it was in that moment, as Sarah wrote the first words of their new chapter, that David leaned across the table and whispered the word that would change everything. Forever. The word hung in the air between them, simple and complex, a promise and a question, and a declaration all at once. Sarah looked up from her journal, meeting David's eyes, and saw in them everything she had ever wanted, and everything she had ever feared. Forever, she whispered back, and in that single word, she gave him her whole heart, her whole future, her whole self. David reached into his jacket pocket, his hands trembling slightly, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. When he pulled out a small velvet box, the world seemed to slow down around them. I know this isn't the most romantic place, David said, his voice soft but steady. And I know we've only been in Portland for 3 days. But Sarah, I've been carrying this ring for 2 months, waiting for the right moment. And I realized something this morning. Sarah's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the coffee shop could hear it. What did you realize? She whispered. That there is no perfect moment, David said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the morning light. There are only real moments. And this moment, right here, with you choosing to build a life with me, with us starting fresh in a new city, with you writing the beginning of our story, this feels like the most real moment I've ever experienced. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she looked at the ring, then at David's face, which was full of hope and love and the same vulnerability she had fallen in love with months ago. Sarah Mitchell, David said, and her name and his voice sounded like a prayer. Will you marry me? The question hung between them like a bridge to their future. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the magnitude of what he was asking, the beauty of what he was offering. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, David, forever. Yes. David's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, as if this moment had been inevitable from the first morning they had shared coffee and conversation. The other patrons in the coffee shop began to applaud, but Sarah barely heard them. She was too busy looking at David, this man who had loved her enough to wait for her to find her courage, who had included her in his dreams, who had just asked her to share his entire life. I can't believe you've been carrying that ring for 2 months, Sarah said, laughing through her tears. I bought it the day after our first real conversation, David admitted. I knew it was crazy, but I also knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. I just had to wait for you to want the same thing. Sarah looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at David's face. I've wanted the same thing since the day I walked into the library looking for you, she said. I just didn't know how to say it. You didn't have to say it, David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I could see it in the way you looked at me, in the way you trusted me with your fears, in the way you chose to come to Portland with me. I've been able to see it for months. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the depth of her love for this man, by the way he had seen her so clearly when she couldn't even see herself. I love you, she said, and the words felt different now, weighted with the promise of forever. I love you, too, David replied. My fiancé. The word sent a thrill through Sarah's entire body. Fiancé. She was going to marry David. They were going to build a life together, officially and completely and forever. "We need to call everyone," Sarah said suddenly, the reality of their engagement beginning to sink in. "Later," David said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. "First, I want to kiss my fiancé." He kissed her right there in the coffee shop, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and the sounds of their new city all around them. It was a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility and the beginning of everything they had dreamed of. When they broke apart, Sarah felt as if she were glowing from the inside out. "So what happens now?" she asked, the same question David had asked her that morning, but with an entirely different meaning. "Now we plan a wedding," David said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Now we figure out how to merge our book collections. Now we find the perfect place to hang your writing awards when you win them. And now we live happily ever after," Sarah asked, only half joking. "Now we live," David corrected gently. "Happily, hopefully, but mostly just fully. Together." Sarah looked around the coffee shop that had become the site of their engagement, at the ring on her finger, at the man who had changed her life simply by being exactly who he was. She thought about the story she had been writing in her journal, about new chapters and blank pages and the courage required to fill them. "I think I like that even better," she said, as they walked home through the streets of Portland. Hand in hand, Sarah felt as if she were walking into the rest of her life. There would be challenges ahead, she knew. There would be moments of doubt and difficulty and the ordinary struggles that came with building a life with another person. But there would also be morning conversations over coffee, quiet evenings reading together, the joy of watching David help library patrons find exactly what they were looking for. There would be books to write and dreams to chase, and the deep satisfaction of loving someone who loved her back with the same intensity. Most importantly, there would be the knowledge that she had chosen adventure over safety, love over fear, and the uncertain beauty of a shared future over the comfortable loneliness of a solitary life. That night, as they lay in bed in their new apartment, Sarah's engagement ring catching the light from the street lamp outside, David turned to her with a question. "Do you remember what you said that first day we really talked?" he asked. "About being afraid to write what you really wanted to say." "I remember," Sarah said, curling closer to him. "I think that's what love is," David said thoughtfully. "It's being brave enough to say what you really want to say, to show who you really are, even when you're terrified the other person might not understand." Sarah thought about this, about the way David had shown her his fears and his dreams, about the way she had let him see her struggles and her hopes. "I think you're right," she said. "I think that's exactly what love is." "Then we've been doing it right," David said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We have," Sarah agreed, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely confident in her ability to love and be loved. 6 months later, Sarah's novel was published to critical acclaim and modest commercial success. She dedicated it to David, who taught me that the best stories are the ones we write together. The dedication made David cry, which made Sarah cry, which made them both laugh at how ridiculously happy they were. Their wedding was small and perfect, held in the Portland Botanical Gardens on a day when the roses were in full bloom. Sarah wore her grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. David wore his best suit and a smile that rivaled the sun. They wrote their own vows, of course. David promised to love Sarah's words as much as he loved her, to believe in her dreams even when she couldn't believe in them herself, to be her partner in all the adventures yet to come. Sarah promised to trust David with her fears as well as her hopes, to support his dreams as enthusiastically as he supported hers. to choose him every day for the rest of her life. As they exchanged rings, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first morning in the coffee shop on 5th Street, to this perfect day in Portland, it had been a story of small moments and quiet gestures, of love that grew from friendship and respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. First dance was to a song David had chosen, something soft and romantic that spoke of lasting love and shared dreams. As they swayed together, Sarah looked up into his eyes and saw their entire future reflected there. "So," David said, echoing the question they had asked each other so many times, "what happens now?" Sarah smiled, her heart full of love and possibility. "Now we write the next chapter," she said, "together." And as they danced under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved most, Sarah knew that whatever pages lay ahead of them, they would fill them with the same honesty and courage and deep, abiding love that had brought them together in the first place. The story of Sarah and David didn't end with their wedding. Of course, it continued through quiet mornings and busy days, through the challenges of building a life together, and the joy of watching their love deepen with each passing season. Sarah went on to write 3 more novels, each one better than the last. David was promoted to head librarian and started a community reading program that became a model for libraries across the country. They bought a house with a garden where they could grow flowers and vegetables, and a study where Sarah could write and David could read. But it was the small moments that mattered most. The way David still brought Sarah coffee in bed on weekend mornings. The way Sarah still watched him help library patrons with the same gentle attention that had first caught her eye. The way they still found new things to talk about over dinner every night. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the coffee shop where David had proposed. It had become a tradition, a way of remembering where their forever had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked as they sat at the same table where David had whispered that magical word. "Leaving New York, taking a chance on us." David reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. "Never," he said. "Not for a single moment. Do you?" Sarah looked at this man who had loved her enough to include her in his dreams, who had been patient enough to wait for her to find her courage, who had been honest enough to show her his fears as well as his hopes. She thought about the life they had built together, the love they had nurtured, the story they were still writing. "Never," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Outside the coffee shop window, Portland bustled with life there. Life. The life they had chosen together. And inside, 2 people who had found in each other not just love, but home, sat holding hands across a small table, still amazed by the magic of ordinary moments shared with the right person. The word forever had indeed changed everything. It had transformed 2 separate lives into one beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect story of love that grew stronger with each passing day. And as Sarah would write in her journal that night, sometimes the best stories are the ones that don't end. They just keep getting better. One chapter at a time. One whispered word at a time. One shared moment at a time.